Morning, colleagues. We welcome you to this webinar with the title Decolonising Climate Risk Scholarship from the Global North to Africa. We are actually hosting this webinar in collaboration with partners from the University of Venda here in South Africa, the Midland State University in Zimbabwe, and also colleagues from Namibia who will be presenting. So as a start, I would want to hand over to our research director at the Human Sciences Research Council in the Developmental Capable Ethical State Division to offer us opening remarks and a welcome address. Over to you, Dr. Mohanso Makwai.
Muted.
Sorry about that. Welcome everyone to this webinar, and thank you very much, Dr. Wilfred, for welcoming me warmly. We welcome everyone to this webinar, which the HSRC is hosting in collaboration with other institutions in Southern Africa, the Midland State University, the University of Venda, and also our colleagues in Namibia. And as Dr. Lunga has indicated, this is a webinar titled Decolonising Climate Risk Scholarship for the global, from the Global North to Africa. And this is an important topic, colleagues, taking into consideration the ecological situation we find ourselves, how environments are consistently being disrupted by various factors, and we see a lot of uncertainty in relation to climate crisis itself, but also we find that climate crisis is coinciding with wars that are taking place in different parts of the world. We find that climate crisis is also coexisting with declines in economic growth, and prosperity is under threat. And we also find that geopolitical polarity is affecting various ways in which communities, governments could collaborate to restore normality and certainty. But most worrying also is the fact that we find that where relationships take place, they are characterized by selective solidarity. And this is a problem for humanity in the context of a human development program that has been forged around multilateralism and also around relationships across boundaries. And as the world is facing these challenges that we are talking about, as recent as 2024, we find that the world fails to achieve one of the simplest goals it set itself, that of avoiding global average temperatures to go above 1.5 degrees centigrade. And already this shows that we are living in a world where it is difficult to push the common agenda at the same rhythm and with the same form of effort. And it is also challenging that solutions to reduce climate risk, disaster, have to be found and be negotiated and implemented by governments and communities that are ever facing multiple risks simultaneously. And as the historian Adam Tooze referred to this situation, polycrisis, we know that it is a challenge. It requires multifaceted ways of addressing the problems, finding solutions, and also ensuring that there are sufficient investments to address these issues. Colleagues, while some of the risks that compound climate risk are more localized, many are globalized, and all have to be envisaged through policies and investments that ensure sustainability and inclusion. And the webinar that we have today is addressing these challenges that we face in relation to whose knowledge gets to be included and whose knowledge gets to be excluded. And we find that as a result of these patterns of exclusion, it is a huge responsibility for governments, but also for multilateral partnerships such as the United Nations, also for civil society organizations and even the private sectors. We find that it is a big responsibility for them to ensure that the policies and investments are driven by balanced and inclusive knowledge. And at the center of this are science-producing communities. The science community, producing communities, the scientists, researchers, find themselves at the center of these processes, and they have to influence, and they are also influenced by this context of competition for knowledge in terms of whose knowledge gets to be accepted as knowledge and whose knowledge is kept on the margins of discussions that take place around reducing climate-related risk. But also there is a real challenge in that the reality is that knowledge production and also the theories that frame knowledge production, as well as the voices that represent this knowledge, they are largely shaped by power structures. And this is a reality that is difficult to ignore. But it is encouraging to see that social science and humanities have begun to question how knowledge, how scholarship around climate risk reduction is being addressed. What kind of policies are put in place? And they draw attention to the unequal contribution and domination of the institutions that are particularly influential when it comes to designing climate disaster risk policy. And that is policy for the entire world. But we find that it is influenced by knowledge that is generated in only parts of the world, not the entire globe. And the bias is real in that most of the knowledge systems that influence decisions about knowledge about climate disaster risk are epistemologies and methodologies that are informed by the global north knowledge systems. And the global north knowledge systems are playing a significant role, but there is a problem in the sense that they are characterized and they are also informed by ethnocentric understandings. And these understandings are based on othering. They are informed by ideas that drove colonialism, imperialism, and also they tend to be Western-centric. And they harbor these values that put the West at the center while devaluing knowledge systems of other regions of the world, including Africa. So this webinar and the discussions that are taking place today are important and they are relevant. They are relevant to the larger agenda of the Human Sciences Research Council and its partners and collaborators around issues of climate change and risk that prevails as a result of climate change. The Council, in partnership with its stakeholders and also other role players on the continent, and also globally, those who have similar understandings and want to drive the agenda that is informed by equality, they are committed to mainstreaming marginalized knowledge systems. And these marginalized knowledge systems include indigenous knowledge in climate disaster risk scholarship, which is the topic that we are talking about today. And this is important because policy, planning, and governance around these matters has to be informed by scholarship that is balanced. And the Human Sciences Research Council wants to play a role in this regard. And therefore, we are drawing our histories and we are also drawing from our knowledge as people of Africa and also borrowing from other knowledges and contexts, but seeing these different forms of knowledges as equal and as having the same place to contribute to humanity and to contribute towards finding solutions that are co-designed with communities and informed in our context in Africa by indigenous knowledge systems. And we want to do this in order to foster well-being, to protect health, and to also enhance livelihoods of the most vulnerable people who are marginalized in communities and on the continent. So colleagues, these are some of the issues that the presentations we're going to have today by academics, researchers, and also representatives of civil society. We are going to listen to how they see the problem evolving in their own context and we hope that this is going to be an effort that enriches our knowledge as role players in this domain. You are all welcome, and we hope to have a vibrant discussion this morning and in the afternoon. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Wilfred.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanso, for the warm welcome to this webinar. And indeed, just to add on what you have said, if we look at the global share of greenhouses emission, you'll find that the whole of Africa actually just contribute a mere 4%. And out of that 4%, 35% is South Africa, which is mainly from the emission of fossil fuels. And also to tap on what you were saying in terms of knowledge, you'll find that despite Africa actually contributing very little in terms of greenhouses emission, the knowledge production and the policy making, as you have rightly pointed, is dominated by the global north, meaning that, you know, African perspectives, as you already highlighted, are undervalued, but this is despite, you know, the resilience which the people in Africa actually have. So we envisage, as you have already highlighted, that the webinar will actually contribute to intellectual and ethical exercise. We envisage that this webinar definitely will encourage participants to apply mental and cognitive effort in questioning dominant paradigms which we are facing, and also to try and come up with other alternatives. We also hope that the webinar will actually contribute to building frameworks that are context specific to Africa, and they are also rooted in the realities which we experience here in Africa. We also hope that it will also promote framing that is consistent with African lived experiences, as well as embrace the Ubuntu philosophy. But also, above all what you have said, this seminar actually is helping us to set the tone for our upcoming conference, which we are going to have in Namibia on climate change and futures in Africa, which is going to be co-hosted by the Human Sciences Research Council, as well as the National Commission on Research and Science Technology, which is an institution in Namibia. So without much ado, colleagues, would want to welcome our keynote speaker, Fatima Peters, who is from the University of Venda. Fatima Peters is a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Venda. She has over 15 years experience in higher education and is completing her PhD titled The Role of Critical Research Methodologies in Climate Psychology. The focus in her research is to explore how research methodologies are used to achieve justice and transformation for marginalized communities using critical, innovative, creative approaches in climate psychology. Over to you, Fatima Peters.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this amazing engagement today. As my presentation shows, today I'm going to be speaking about epistemic violence and justice in climate change. I just want to go to the, right, there we go. There we go. Is my presentation visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So, as I was saying, and I thank the HSRC for this amazing engagement, the introduction to this webinar. I mean, the symposium is really on point and aligns well with what I'm going to say and with all the other presentations today. So to start off with, bringing us back to this aspect of colonization. And when we think about marginalized communities and people that have experienced colonization across the world, It is often our blood that has been spilled in the improvement of global capitalism and making certain global northern countries wealthy on the blood, sweat, and tears of marginalized communities across the globe. And it is within, as the previous presenters have said, it is within this framework that we need to think about climate change and climate justice. And this is the foundation upon which I'm going to be discussing my particular presentation. So when I think about climate change, I don't think about it in terms of um, carbon emissions and carbon emissions and sea level rise. I think about climate change in terms of my lived experience. As they have said, my name is Fatima Peters. I work at the University of Venda. I live in Limpopo province, and we have experienced in so many different problems with regard to water. And for me, as a person from the global south, water is at the heart of the problems that I've been experiencing when it comes to climate justice. This is not only a me problem, this is a problem for the entire area of Limpopo and the world. Water injustice will be one of the biggest problems that we will be tackling in the near future. And as the previous presenter said, climate change is an intersectional ecological problem that includes human beings and is because of human beings. Right. So the things that I will be discussing today relates to epistemic violence and its related aspects, the location of climate change in global climate justice discourses, defining marginalization, and then talking about indigenous people as a category of marginalized groups. Then I will speak about climate justice, and I will propose some ways in which we can move forward thinking through climate justice and its relationship to climate change. Right, so I really like that the previous presenters also spoke about epistemic violence, and I think we really need to get into this concept a little bit more in depth. So epistemic violence is the systemic silencing, delegitimization, or overwriting of particular knowledges, ways of knowing, or intellectual frameworks by dominant ones, often in colonial and power imbalanced contexts. The non-physical form of violence invalidates the intellectual and cultural power of subjugated groups, causing them to lose their history, identity, and capacity to articulate their own realities by imposing foreign epistemic frameworks. And what I like when I read Frantz Fanon is one of those decolonial scholars who have critiqued the ways in which people have been othered. Indigenous people, people of color, women, children. And Frantz Fanon, when he thinks about or talks about epistemic violence, he talks about the cultural and psychological damage caused by colonial systems that impose Eurocentric views, invalidating and erasing the history, culture, the value of the colonized person. It's a form of violence seen in the medical, educational, and social spheres, forces the colonized to internalize inferiority and adopt the colonizer's perspective, leading to trauma and loss. And when I think about what Frantz Fanon is saying in relation to my own context, my experience of water injustice and water insecurity, when I read about climate change and water insecurity, it is often the person experiencing the problem that is made to be the problem. And if we are to really get to the heart and break the injustices that people that are marginalized experience, we need to think about how are we framing the people that are being researched? How are we thinking about them? How are we working with them? How are we thinking about people that are marginalized in ways that are from a strength perspective as opposed from a deficit perspective? And epistemic violence really is something that speaks to how you think about a particular problem. Now, I know that later on in the program, we will be having people talk about the research methods and how research methods inform climate change and how they are being revolutionizing. And so when Frantz Fanon also speaks about the epistemic violence in research, and he says in his book, Dr. H.L. Gordon, an attending physician at the mental hospital in Nairobi, declared in an article in the East African Medical Journal, a highly technical skills examination of a series of 100 brains of normal natives has found naked eye and microscopic facts indicating of the inherent brain inferiority. Quantitatively added, the inferiority amounts to 14.8%. So what Transvanani is speaking about in this excerpt is the way in which research has been used to perpetuate injustice against people that are marginalized. And in this specific example, he's talking about people of Black heritage, their brain size being measured. And this research is saying that it quantitatively demonstrates that because our brain size is smaller, we are by implication inferior. And what this relates to is a problem with the way in which knowledge is used to oppress people that are experiencing colonization. And in today's day and age, we might not be experiencing direct colonization where we are being managed by the United Kingdom. Currently, we need to think about the concept of coloniality and how currently, even though we are no longer being ruled by a foreign entity, we are still experiencing the injustices today as marginalized people. And I frame the current engagement with indigenous knowledge systems within the concept of marginalization because it facilitates us to think about how is it that we can foreground the need for epistemic justice for all marginalized groups and specifically for people from indigenous communities. So one of the things about climate change is that often it's talked about as though it is something that was caused by the Industrial Revolution. But what often is left out is the fact that colonization actually started when human beings became a commodity, when people of color were taken from their home and used as slaves in the global slave trade. And when we think about the process of colonization, it is when both the environment and human beings became commodities. Our knowledge systems was eroded, our environments was plundered, and our human bodies as slaves, we really weren't thought of as human beings. As Frans Fanon says, we were othered in the system, and we are currently othered in the ways in which climate change is being spoken about. And as I said, coloniality is the current epistemological violence against marginalized groups through multiple intersections of oppression. Right? Climate change, we can think about it as the physical and mental health risks that we experience because of climate change. Now, climate change will be one of the major factors that will increase vector-borne diseases and illnesses. It will cause an increase in bacteria, increase in viruses and parasites that will really affect people across the globe and more specifically people that are marginalized. And so because climate change will affect the most marginalized people most often, marginalized groups, indigenous women, children, the elderly, LGBTQI people, all of us that are marginalized will experience climate change far worse. And I will speak about this in another slide a little bit more. Okay, so when we think about climate change, when you read about it from the natural sciences, they talk about there's an increase in carbon emissions. That is correct. There's an increase in sea level rise. That is correct. There will be extreme weather events because of flooding, drought, heat waves, landslides, tornadoes. There will be a major biodiversity loss. And in Limpopo, we have a new mine that has been approved. They have been destroying all the trees in our area, major areas of trees being removed, and we are already experiencing water injustice. The mine not only will cause that people that are marginalized in Limpopo to have less water because the mines will be using the little water that we have to run the mine. And so at what cost is the mine in Limpopo province going to contribute not only to the changes in the carbon emissions in our area, but the weather? And something that is really important is to note that Food security in Limpopo province is something that a lot of people, they grow spinach, they have avocado trees, people live off the land. And when we change the climate in any particular area by increasing carbon emissions, it causes more droughts. But the people that are most affected is the people on the ground, the people that are not heard, the people that are not seen, and the people that are never included. And yes, when we talk about climate change, we are talking about ice caps melting, and we're talking about bears losing their habitat, at the acidification of the oceans, because the ocean is one of the entities that takes the most carbon dioxide from the environment. But when we go and we really look at climate change from marginalized people's perspectives, we are not necessarily speaking about the problem from a global northern way of framing it. We're thinking about it from our experiences of water injustice, our experiences of food insecurity, our experiences of airborne pollution, our experiences of an increase in disease, vector-borne diseases such as malaria, Lyme disease, and various other. Our experiences of poverty, where in South Africa we have the biggest difference between people that are wealthy and people that are poor, with people that are poor having to really live off very little money. And when we think of poverty, we don't think about the far-reaching implications that climate change will have on people that are impoverished. And another thing that I relate this to is that in Cape Town, they had the spring tide, and it contributed to massive flooding in most of Cape Town and other parts of the Western Cape. But what they weren't saying was that the response by the government and the municipality facilitated that the more wealthy areas had a lot more response. There was sand, bags of sand. There were people deployed to protect these areas. But in areas where people were living in informal settlements, their houses were completely devastated, and they don't have any way to get that things back. People that live in informal settlements don't have insurance where they can phone the insurance and say, look, my house was flooded. I'm going to pay the difference in money, and then the insurance pays them out. People that live in poverty, people that are marginalized, are often the people that will suffer the burden of climate change most. And when we think about this from a psychological perspective, we see that people that are marginalized are more prone to experiencing problems such as acute stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, suicide, and substance abuse. And what this relates to is also heat stress. The warmer our climate is going to become, the more it is that people are going to start experiencing problems. Women that are pregnant are prone to having complications with their pregnancy and various other health concerns. So when we think about climate change, it moves beyond the ice caps melting. That is extremely important. But when we think about epistemic violence for the person on the ground, we need to think about when we are working in these areas, how are we working with the people experiencing this problem? And the except at the bottom, it says broad brush solutions that do not consider the issues of equity and justice in climate change will fail. And so when we think about knowledge systems, who's producing the most information on climate change, we will find that you type in climate change and you look who is presenting the information. In all the systematic reviews that I've gone through, the majority of the information being published is from the global north. It is by countries such as the United States of America, the UK, Australia. And in this context, these people are framing how we think and experience and engage with climate change. And the problem is that people that have the money then come into African context, South American context, Asian context, and they do interventions that cost a lot of money, but has very little impact because it thinks about us as people from the global South as inferior, as incapable, and to blame for the problems that we are experiencing. And so epistemic violence in climate change and psychology literature really blames the person for experiencing the problem. I read one of the articles when I was doing my own systematic review on research methodologies in climate psychology, and one of the comments was, why are people not leaving their home and moving to a place that isn't prone to flooding? And it's like, you're blaming the person for the experience of flooding, and you're not taking into consideration place attachment. People are deeply rooted in their homes, in their places where they live, in their communities. It's not so simple to just tell somebody they must leave. There's a lack of response during extreme weather events. If we think about Hurricane Katrina, the United States government took extremely long to respond to the people that had experienced the Hurricane Katrina. Oh, my word is messing up today. And epistemic violence is also relating to the challenges and the lack of support systems for people that are marginalized. Okay, so when I think about climate justice, we think about what the term is BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous people of color. And I frame climate justice in this marginalized group because I want to foreground the need for us to look at Indigenous people as belonging to other groups of people that also experience marginalization. And I want to argue that if we put all groups that are marginalized together and we stand together and fight for climate justice, we will have more people that can stand together and fight against the injustices. But if we separate ourselves from each other, we have less power and less voice. So let us rather stand together to fight against the impact of climate change, who will disproportionately affect the greatest number of people that are marginalized because of global systems such as racism, sexism, classism, and the perpetual experience of coloniality, which continues to unfairly discriminate, disenfranchise, and alienate people that are marginalized. So climate justice advocates for equitable solutions that address systemic inequalities to ensure that vulnerable populations have a voice and fairly distribute the benefits, but also the burdens of climate action and its solutions. So marginalization, it really exacerbates the impacts of climate change against vulnerable communities, and we need to recognize these injustices. Climate justice furthermore calls for policies and actions that ensure equitable treatment and empowerment of marginalized groups, right? So that we can include people that are marginalized in decisions that we are making, in the solutions that we are developing, and we really need to listen to what people are saying. Okay, moving on. So this concept of marginalization, right? Marginalization, when we think about the page, we think about marginalization as being on the outside of that particular page. And everything that is important is at the center. And as the person that wrote this particular phrasing says, this is a very simple way of thinking about it. But climate injustice and marginalization is much more complex than what we're actually giving it credit for. So though this metaphor is quite simple, when we think about marginalization, it means that it refers to people and groups who are pushed away from the opportunity, the influence, and the overall visibility. So today, being marginalized doesn't just mean being excluded. It refers to the systemic ways individuals or communities are treated as less important, less powerful, less worthy within life, socially, politically, and economically. Right? Moving on. So, when we think about people that are indigenous, we need to also recognize that even though I'm saying we need to frame the problems of climate justice within a marginalized group, each individual, each separate marginalized category are also unique. It has unique ways of thinking about problems. It has unique ways of dealing with problems. It has unique worldviews. It has its own ontologies and own epistemologies. Ontology, the way that world is being seen, and the ways of producing information. And for me, when I think about the concept of decolonization, I'm not saying we're going to exclude what we know. When we're looking at knowledge being produced from a critical perspective, we think of adding to what is known and improving and ensuring justice for marginalized groups. So I would argue against this concept of normalization and standardization of assumptions, because it really it brings across this concept of universal experiences, and experiences are not universal. Injustice is not universal. People that are marginalized experience climate change far greater than people that are privileged. Also, I would argue that all marginalized groups, they differ, and context matters. For me, in Limpopo province, dealing with water injustice, it's very different to somebody in Cape Town experiencing water injustice. It's very different to somebody in China experiencing water injustice. And so we need to think about the context in which the research is being done. And something that is really important is to actually understand the people, the context, and the ways in which the problems are being thought of and experienced. So there's an emphasis on environment and relationships when we are working with people that are indigenous, because one of the biggest concerns for people that are indigenous is that when people are indigenous, there's a relationship with the environment that is different to other people's relationship with the environment. And so people that are indigenous, research is demonstrating that when there is forests being destroyed, when there is water being removed, when people are experiencing climate injustice, that there's a higher rate of anxiety and depression for people that are indigenous. And that is because of the spiritual and cultural connection with land. And you can refer to Farhuden 2024, the systematic review on marginalized people's experiences of climate injustice. So moving on. So when we think about people that are working from indigenous knowledge systems, people that are marginalized and indigenous, we got the major regulating framework from an international perspective is the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People. And in the statement, they outline that for indigenous people have a right to dignity, well-being, and the minimum standards for how we should be working with indigenous people. Indigenous people have a right not to be forced to assimilate into cultures and contexts that are different to how they perceive the world. Indigenous people have a right not to be discriminated against. People that are indigenous have a right to self-governance, to not be forced to be removed from the land upon which they are, which is in Limpopo province, the mine came, they removed all the people that lived on the mine. And there are many other examples of where in South Africa mining is a big thing. In South Africa, we can see that wherever there has been mining, people and communities that live on the fence of the mine, they are experiencing greater problems with health, asthma, cancer of the lungs. They have problems with their water being polluted. They have problems with the air being polluted. And so when we think about not being forced from the land that you own, that is something that is really important, not only in South Africa, but across the world, and especially with big corporations that buy the land for whatever reasons, whether it is farming, whether it is coal mines, whether it is water, whether it is wind farms, even wind farms that is supposed to be a climate-friendly solution, is forcing people that are indigenous off the land, not consulting with people, not including people, not listening to people. And so indigenous people also have the right to participate and consent to the decisions that affect them. They have a right to control traditionally owned land and resources. And most importantly, indigenous people should have the right to self-determination and freely determining how they consider themselves as indigenous people. So, the right to self-definition is extremely important from the UNDRIP because it facilitates the respectful well-being and the respect for people that are indigenous to self-determine. So historically, people that are in colonial contexts haven't had this opportunity to define who we are, where we come from, how we see climate change. And there's no singular definition for any marginalized group. That is why it is important for each marginalized group to define who they are. But at the same time, as we are defining who we are, not to perpetuate the injustices in the system by excluding other marginalized groups that are experiencing climate injustice in similar ways. So at the same time as we are fighting for justice for indigenous people, we also need to be inclusive and stand together with other marginalized groups for climate justice. Right. So when we're looking at the literature and when we think about our own praxis as researchers, there's a tendency for research methods and ways of working with indigenous people to really come from the outside and impose their ways of seeing and believing about climate change upon people that are indigenous. And I'd like to refer to Bagise Julise, her research, Tawa Smith's research on on decolonizing research methods, because they really foreground the need for us to actually listen, to listen empathetically, to listen with meaning, to listen to the lived reality of the person going through the problem, and to not perpetuate the silencing and harming of people that are marginalized and indigenous. We need to listen beyond our own experiences, because we know that in research and when working with other people, we work from our own assumptions. We frame the problem from our own experiences and our own worldview. And often, when we do that, we don't often do it in a way that is intentionally meant to exclude the other person. However, the experience of the ways in which we work with indigenous people contributes towards the silencing. And so, what I would foreground and would argue for is the need for us to actually just listen with empathy more than anything else, because when we listen with empathy, we can actually hear what the other person is going through and prevent that we perpetuate epistemic violence in what it is that we write, what it is that we theorize, and what it is that we think. Something else I would also recommend when we are working with indigenous people and marginalized people is that we share power. We share the people that are more marginalized to be included in the spaces that we are working in, because we go into communities, we take their knowledge, but how often do we share the benefits of their knowledge with the people that have shared that knowledge? So we need to think about voice, we need to think about participation, we need to think about inclusion, we need to think about empowerment, but most importantly, we need to think about how do we facilitate emancipation of people that are marginalized. We need to really have meaningful participation, not something where we say, oh, we're having a community session to discuss the mines, but then it is at the time or at the place that is inaccessible to people that are indigenous. Where people that come together and write what's this word that I'm looking for? A petition against the mine, but no one listens to them, because the people with the power are not listening to the people that are going to experience the worst effects of climate change. And we need to really work towards equal power, equal participation, equal voice, so that we can transform the systems that we are working with within higher education, within non-governmental organizations, and within the knowledge economy within society. Right? So transformation is really important, because as the previous two presenters have introduced, the people with the most power are also the people that are privileged and framing the problem. And we need to do research that really gives voice to people that are marginalized and especially indigenous. Right. So research with marginalized people, it needs to move beyond tokenism. We say, oh, we're going to work with this community, but we don't actually listen to them. Where we say, we're going to have meetings every week, but then we don't think about this person. They are coming from an area, they don't have a stable employment, they have to travel to the meeting, they have to travel back, and this is at the cost to them. How are we as institutions thinking about and framing the cost to the people that we want to include? How can we change our systems, our finance systems, our ways of doing research to be more respectful and to include people beyond the tokenism? Include people in a way that is meaningful, listening empathetically, and also giving voice towards the concept or the goal of emancipation. Right, so how do we, from a methodological and a researcher perspective, start beginning to engage and change climate injustice and epistemic violence? We need to think about the theories that we are using. The theories that we are using needs to look at things such as strengths, work from a justice perspective, use things such as capability perspective or capability theory by Sen. These types of theories help us to then think about people that are marginalized and indigenous people in a way that is positive, in a way that shows that people that are indigenous are not sitting on their hands and doing nothing. People are working collaboratively in communities. They are trying to address the problems that they're experiencing in their ways. And when we think from a strengths-based perspective, we can see the changes that are being implemented by indigenous communities. But when we work from the standardized way in which knowledge has been produced, it perpetuates that epistemic violence I started speaking about right at the beginning. It perpetuates that we are people that are marginalized are blamed for what we are experiencing. And so, what do we need to do? We need to be critically reflexive in our theory, in our practice, in our collaboration, and in our engagement. And where do we need to do this? We need to do it within our universities, within our research organizations, within our communities, within our non-governmental institutions, so that we can really transform and work against the epistemic violence that is experienced. And also importantly, within our publication spheres, we need to think about beyond the articles that we're publishing, what other engagements are we doing in the community? What other ways are we contributing towards community changes, community upliftment, community production of inclusion and equity? Right. And then, so for me, climate justice really is about the inclusion of all marginalized people that are removed from having a say about their own lives, and especially indigenous knowledge, indigenous communities to have the right not to be silenced and exploited in for the knowledge that they have. And with that, I think I've given a lovely introduction to the other presentations for today. So thank you very much. Loribuati, Shukran, Inkoma, Niyabonga. And over to you in the office, Dr. Khadija. That's the references. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fatima. You know, I was so much engaged that we had allocated 15 minutes and I said, no, let me continue listening because you were taking me through memory lane on some of the issues which you are raising, which is very, very critical. There's an article which I think I'll share after this called Stop Blaming Climate Change for All the Hazards and Disasters which are happening. A very interesting one, and it was also touching on a lot of issues which you are raising. And you'll see you are really speaking to those issues which we're talking about this topic, where we are saying the lived experience of people is totally different from the way climate change is being conceptualized or framed. You took us through the conceptualization of epistemic violence. You also took us through the progression of epistemic violence, which I think is very critical, especially in climate change studies, in disaster risk studies, because you see actually the progression. When did it start? And it helps us to understand even the core aspects of climate change, where you highlighted several of them. And also you took us through the FAIR principles, where you were looking at the rights which are supposed to be observed among the indigenous communities. Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. We will proceed to the next, and then people will start asking questions once. I hand over to you, Dr. Den.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilfred and Fatima. Thank you for that riveting presentation. It was so interesting. We're going to move to our next segment, which is challenging climate knowledge hierarchies. And we will be starting this session with a presentation by Dr. Charles Musa Rua, and his presentation will be focusing on interrogating climate knowledge hierarchies by asking whose knowledge counts and whose is excluded. It specifically highlights the marginalization of African knowledge systems and the invisibility of certain groups, including persons with disabilities. Just to run through the flow of the session, after Dr. Charles's presentation, we will have 5 minutes for reflections, questions, answers, and discussion, and then we will have a 5-minute poll. Yes, so just to read Dr. Charles's bio before he begins. Dr. Charles Musa Rua is a lecturer in geography and environmental education in the Department of Science, Technology, and Design Education at Midland State University in Zimbabwe. He worked as a teacher, educator for several years at Hillside Teachers College in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, before joining the University of Botswana, where he taught and also got a PhD in geography education. Dr. Musurua's research interests are in areas of climate change, disaster risk reduction, environmental education, environmental impact assessment, education and sustainable development, indigenous knowledge systems, and geographical information systems. That was a mouthful, Dr. Charles. And then he has also published extensively in his areas of interest. Over to you, Dr. Charles. It's good to have you with us. Thank you. So I think you muted, Dr. Charles.
Oh, yeah, I think I'm now. Am I
Dr.
audible
Charles.
now?
Yes, you
Am I-
are.
Yes, you are, Dr. Charles. You are? Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Let me share my presentation. So that, yes. I hope you can see it.
Yes, it's still busy loading, Dr. Charles. So let's just give it a moment because it's not visible yet on our side.
Okay. Do
you know
Yes.
what the issue is? Oh, there we see it, Dr. Charles. Your name is just
Okay.
put it in presentation mode. Thank you, Doc.
Okay, thank you. My presentation is very simple, and I've structured it this way. I will look at the conceptualization of climate knowledge hierarchies, and then whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge is excluded. And I'll also look at the invisibility of disadvantaged and vulnerable groups in terms of climate change and disaster risk, and on to barriers of climate knowledge in production and consumption. Yes. And lastly, addressing inequalities. You'll find that, sorry, some of what I'm going to say here is more from experience, my own experience as a researcher as well. I'll be like referring to one or two things that I have observed during the course of our research. Right. Let me go on to climate knowledge hierarchies. And when you look at climate knowledge, we can put it into like compartments, as it were. There's climate knowledge that is certainly more on the content side, where we are looking at the types of knowledge, we are looking at methodologies, we are looking at perspectives, geographic origins over others. Now, we have these about 5 compartments that I have put down that we always refer to. And the climate knowledge hierarchies, as it were, refers to the systematic privileging of certain types of knowledge, methodologies, perspectives, and geographical origins of others. In other words, there are probably certain knowledges or certain paradigms, certain frameworks that are regarded as scientific, while others are not. I still remember listening to someone saying indigenous knowledge is not scientific. And I was just wondering, is that true? Are you saying the knowledge about climate and disasters that we have in our society is not scientific? For interest's sake, I have had a situation where talking to my compatriots in our rural home areas, you would definitely tell you scientific information without using the word science itself. That when wind is blowing from this direction, from the south, then suddenly it changes direction, it blows from the north, we are most likely to have rain. And such people are looking at things like a convergence. He's not talking about convergence, but he's showing that there's convergence. Or someone telling you that today I'm going to fertilize my crops in the field because there was a lot of dew in the morning and the chances of rain are very far away, which also shows that he is just failing to tell us that condensation has already happened, the air is dry. So some of these knowledges are very practical, and they take and for someone to say scientific indigenous knowledge is not scientific is something that I don't believe in as well. We do have a geographical hierarchies. Knowledge from the north is regarded as science. Knowledge from the south is looked down upon. Even as we teach in our universities, as we ask our librarians to get books, they usually look to the northern to the north to get books which they think are the best, in particularly in climate change and disaster risk reduction. And these are hierarchies in a way we are silently being subjected to some of these ideas. Probably we have been cultured to believe that it is like that. Even when we look at climate itself, there are certain things, there are certain topics, there are certain methodologies which are said to be dominant. And then we do have also the marginalized themes, marginalized areas, and so forth. All that, again, puts knowledge into pots or compartments. Someone has already talked about epistemological hierarchies, methodologies that are methodological biases in climate research that recognize the validity, legitimacy, and the value of certain knowledge systems, right? And then probably, again, the indigenous, the local, the traditional, and the southern scholars are not placed on an equal footing with their Western counterparts. And that, again, seems to give us certain hierarchies of knowledge that is counterproductive. Then the last one is economic and institutional hierarchies, where we explore the funding and the other institutional barriers, which again seem to work against the global south. Now, So whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge is excluded, right? Global climatic science is usually written in privileged languages. Either you understand French or English, Portuguese or Spanish. And these are the main languages that we find articles are written in most databases, whether you're looking at Taylor Francis, whether you're looking at Sage and others. We always have these categories. So certain language, certain knowledge written in certain language is regarded as superior than that which is written in our own language. And probably might be a problem that very few also is written in our own language. And therefore, it somehow supports the status quo. When you talk of climate science, we always refer to those paradigms, those climatic models, the convective, the radiative, the mathematical, the general circulation models that we always teach, that we always learn, and that we always even see on television when they present weather and climate. And at times you wonder, are our common men in those areas where they're doing farming, do they really understand what is being put across? So these, even when you are a researcher, if you don't include some of these models, your paper might be rejected when it is being peer reviewed. So peer-reviewed papers are regarded as objective, authentic, if they have these models, as opposed to some experimental, some local knowledge information, some opinion papers, or those are less regarded as well. So,
excuse me, Doctor.
Hello?
Yeah. So you've got 5 minutes left, eh?
All right. It's okay. Let
Awesome.
me just go through. So I'll go to the next slide. Invisibility of vulnerable groups. We've already heard about marginalized groups, which include the old, the women, the aged, the children, etc. And these are the people who are most, can I say, affected by disasters. They are the most people who are affected by climate change, especially women who do most of the work in the fields. And all that, these invisible groups, can we say the way we treat them at micro level in the South is also a reflection of how we, the South, become an invisible group when the North are looking at us. So social inclusion and upholding of human rights of the disabled and marginalized communities is paramount when we are doing our climatic research. And remember that knowledge is co-creation, and co-creation of is a social product which involves co-creation. So invisibility of vulnerable groups is evident. Usually climate data, climate knowledge research is done for the normal in quotations, and we rarely think of those other invisible groups. Barriers to climate knowledge production, high article processing fees for the open access versus free processing for the journals that have a paywall. This is really impacting heavily on the South, because either we don't have the money for the open access, or if we go the free processing way, we have a paywall where we are not visible. Our ideas are not visible. They are locked behind the paywall where you have to pay. And also the disparities in awarding grants. Most grants are awarded to the North because the grant awarding institutions, most of them are in the North. and they make sure that they award grants to those people whom they can partner with. And when they partner, it is always us playing the second fiddle, doing the other manual work, and they do the decision work. And also they want to make sure that whatever grant they give you, the money goes back to them in terms of paying whatever they produce there. Association with prestigious institutions, prestigious people is another barrier. If as a Southern researcher, you don't know someone in good place, your work may not be published, and that is also a problem. It reinforces power hierarchies and marginalizing those with alternative paradigms. At times, I'll probably batch this with an experience where, as we are researching, our papers are being reviewed. There was a paper where we had written about decolonizing climate knowledge, and constantly the reviewer would say, please, can you remove all the words written decolonize in your paper, otherwise it cannot be published. So you end up compromising yourself and actually publishing what you might not be, what you're intending to do. The last thing on this particular aspect, on this particular slide, is scopus versus predatory journals. Well, of course, we always talk of scopus, even at universities. If you don't have scopus journals, promotion is far away from you. But is it not gatekeeping? Or is it a quality issue? At times you find that there are very good articles, very good analysis, very good ideas, paradigms that are found in the so-called predatory journals. It's something that we can think of. I had done some comparison on green climate funds, where we are saying it was intended to give the global south money for research, but only 14.5% of it actually is going to Africans or African institution. This is despite the fact that we are the most hard hit by disasters, and yet, as Dr. Lunga said earlier, Africa probably contributes 4%.
Excuse me, Dr. Charles.
Sorry?
Dr. Charles? Yes.
Hello?
Sorry, to interrupt. Your time is up, but I'll give you 2 minutes just to wrap up because we are running behind schedule. If that's fine, Dr. Charles.
Thank you so much. Maybe we need to address inequalities by establishing open access journals of our own in the global south, accelerating publications and the dissemination of African climate research data, embracing AI to bridge the linguistic gap, because we have too many languages in Africa, and AI, if we embrace it, it could help us, and also establishing the South-South climate funding institutions, and that would help a lot. Thank you so much. I will leave you with some climate change humor. I used to read a book, it was called Reader's Digest, and would enjoy Humor in Uniform. Yes, I will not say who said what, but someone said climate change is mythical, non-existent, and an expensive hoax. Climate change was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. And if climate change is such a bad thing, why can't you turn up your air conditioning? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles, and for that humor. You ended off on a humorous note. We usually say on a high note. And so I'm just going to move on to questions and answers in response to Ms. Fatima's presentation, also Dr. Charles's presentation. We'll have 5 minutes of questions and answers. So over to the questions and answers. But just for for 5 minutes because we are running behind schedule. Thank you, colleagues. I can't see anything on the chat. There's nothing. Oh, just check. There is a question there. You may ask it. Apologies if I mispronounce your name, but Kwanile, you can go ahead and pose your question to either Fatima or Dr. Charles. Thank you.
No, thanks. Can you hear me? No, thanks.
Yes, you are audible. Yeah.
Yes. So I wouldn't say I don't really have a question. But just a comment, just from my experience, firstly around I think Dr. Wilfred was mentioning something that around that the global discourse dominates. The global discourse dominates the policy making processes in the disaster risk and also climate change. So, and I remember when we were in Ethiopia in one of the projects, I think we were in Tanzania. So one professor there said something to the effect that as much as there is a research that is conducted by students within the African continent, those pile of documents, you would find them there in those headquarters there, not making their way into the actual policy documents. So even though there will be evidence from African experiences, but the documentation doesn't go through as either by the people who are making the actual policies. That is just like one comment, but in that regard. And interesting presentation, Fatima, and then you are saying the indigenous people are at the receiving end of the epimistic violence. I must just add that not only that, but also they are at the receiving end of the climate calamities. So one example that I read, I think it was on LinkedIn. In Kenya, there's a community, there's a group of people called Turkana. So they are nomadic people. So they use they use a goat. So there's elders called the Emurons. So they slaughter a goat and then look at the intestines of the goat to predict the weather for those people who are moving around. And then this somehow has been proven accurate when you look with the modern knowledge of predicting weather. So that's just one comment to that effect, and to say that we do have this knowledge, but it really this indigenous knowledge system. But when you actually contrast it really with the modern knowledge, you would find that they actually speak to each other. But I just wanted to make that example and then maybe having that comment.
No, thank you so much.
Not really a question.
Kanile, thank you so much. Right, and Dr. Wilfred.
Thank you, colleagues. We have heard your presentations and they are quite on point. What are your suggestions for the future to make sure that we really do start developing frameworks, models, which will assist us? What's the way forward in your view? What models, what frameworks, what should we do? What are your suggestions?
Is that for Charles or for myself?
Yes, for the both of you. I
For
assume
both of
Dr.
you.
Wilfred is a portion to both of you.
So in my presentation, I spoke about reflexivity. Most of us that are trained within institutions where we still need to decolonize knowledge systems and ways of thinking about problems. And so I think it starts with ourselves for when we are working within our own communities, for us to be more reflexive, more respectful, more listen better, and really be more empathetic. And then for us to collaborate with partners in other countries so that we can work together to change the knowledge systems and knowledge production systems. So I think those are ways that we can work. We need to really fight for the things that are important through our scholarship, and also to really take the knowledge and make it more digestible, making flyers, doing things on the radio, presenting small sessions in the community to traditional leaders and people that can access the information, and using words that is more accessible. So I think that those are things that we can do on the ground. Also, for us, we can publish in global northern journals. I do agree with Charles about the fact that we should publish in our own language systems as well, and overseas, and using other language systems. So I would think those are some of the things we can do, and also not to be scared. We shouldn't be scared about these global systems that are excluding us. That is why I say, let's collaborate with the people that have the money and use their money to make our country better, and other global south contexts, and marginalize people across the globe in all contexts to make their lives and our lives better. So let us use the systems in place for our own advantage. That is what I would recommend.
Thank you so much, Fatima. And you, Dr. Charles, do you just want to say in a response to Dr. Wolf, just short comments? So you on mute, Dr. Charles?
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. My only comment is that as long as we don't control our own, as long as we don't control our own knowledge, then there's nothing we can do. We really need to write in our own knowledge, as Peter has said, and we really need to ensure that all the systems, whether it's political, economic, social, planning, centers around recognizing indigenous knowledges and their impact on our society. Otherwise, without that, there's nothing we can do. So we also need the scholars to rewrite the frameworks that are used for disaster risk and climate change, and factor in the African story, which relates to the unique nature of the various disadvantaged and disadvantaged communities or local communities, and then put that into context. Otherwise, importing knowledge, importing ideas, and holding those foreign ideas is supreme will not work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles and Fatima, once again for that interesting presentations. I had a question, but because of time, I will park it, and maybe when we close, I will mention it. We're going to move over so to a 5-minute poll, a poll that will be facilitated by my colleague, Dr. Khadija, and she will be taking us through this poll. It's a 5-minute fun activity. Over to you.
Thank you. So colleagues, I put the link into the chat as well, but you can scan the barcode. And then if it requires a code, this is the code 19634764. So I'm just going to allow for people to join, and then I'll be able to take it from there. So I can see there's about 12 people that has joined thus far, and we are 27. So I'll give another few seconds before we move. Okay. I'll wait until we get to 20 and then we'll move to 20 participants and then we can move. I see we're getting a lot of love. So yeah. Okay. It seems like we've reached saturation. Okay, we're on 20 now. So I think what we just want to do is really, I know that for some the word decolonizing, is foreign and it's become of late, a buzzword. So I think for us, is in different disciplines, we started seeing the shift. And so really it was for us to just get a sense of how we are moving with times. And then also this is an important as you've heard, it's conceptually an important but also pragmatically an important conversation to be had. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and there's a sequence of questions that we will go through. And the first one is really just to get it's a dipstick test in terms of how familiar we are with these approaches, and not necessarily only to climate, but I mean just in general. Are there approaches that decolonial approaches that one can tap into even from other disciplines? And so I see that 4 out of 22 is familiar. And so it is anonymous in a sense. We don't see the names. And so, yeah, it's really just, we thought that this would be an important conversation to have. And I think that given that we all are learning, this is that opportunity, a learning moment, a teaching moment. And so this is really going to be part of that. Our next segment will also touch on what Dr. Wilfred was asking about, what must be done, right? So I'm going to allow for another minute or so. We see that there's somewhat familiarity with decolonial approaches. I do see in the chat box, and I don't know if this is related to the poll or not, but if anybody just wants to comment on familiarity, just unmute yourself and you can say something about it. I'm going to allow for one reflection or comment, and we'll move on to the next question if there's any. Okay.
Dr.
I don't
Koenig, there's no one
see.
else
Sorry,
that
hi.
wants to... Excuse me. Oh, there's someone else that wants to say something.
Yes, you can go. I see Nompumelelo, I think it was.
Sorry, I heard somebody else about to speak, so I'd rather let that other person speak because I think they spoke first.
Nompumelelo, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I am actually. I was trying to join the poll and I'm struggling. But I wanted to say that I am very familiar with the decolonial approaches. I identify as an African decolonial feminist. I use decolonial frameworks in my study of sexual violence and law reform in South Africa. So for me, I'm just now becoming exposed to the use of this framework within climate justice. So our arguments are basically the same. Everything that Fatima has raised in the presentation today are things that I think a lot of us have also raised in terms of whose knowledges are incorporated in how things are understood. In my context, it's in how sexual violence is conceptualized and how we think about solutions to sexual violence. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you would be keen to share your details on the chat, so we can continue the conversation about this, because this is obviously not just a one-stop or a talk shop type of exercise that we are doing. So we really want to continue the conversation going forward, and then I think we can learn from other disciplines and other areas in terms of this work that we are doing. So I'm going to move on to the next one. And I think this speaks to what Dr. Charles was speaking about. And I hope that you can, what are your thoughts about this? In terms of what knowledge systems is most valued in climate research currently, right? And our hope is for futures to be different. Can everybody still continue on the, okay, perfect. I can't see numbers here now, but we can see that the Western, mixed, community-based, and indigenous knowledge seems to be lost. So that is, I see one participant out of 22. What I will do is we're hoping that we can share this later on, and then package this and put this on for the delegates that are part of this. I'm going to have to rush to the next part, and then I will allow people to still be able to continue with this. We do see that there's a recognition, as everyone has said, the Western methods. Then this one, I would like us to just think about this. What are the barriers to including marginalized voices in climate research? And this will formulate a word cloud. So I'm really excited to see what will come from this. We really don't have much time. I don't want to disadvantage our last two speakers by rushing them. So if colleagues can perhaps just put in a few phrases or words, and I'll give 1 minute for that, and 36 then we will start with Ms. Trina. So acceptance, meaning, resources, language, institutional standards, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to move over, colleagues, and I'm hoping that you can continue to add and populate on here while we move to the next segment. So the next segment is really about the, as you can see, we're hoping to move from the conceptual and the framing of decolonializing climate scholarship to the actioning and what are we supposed to do, because we are talking about it, but we also need to know what we should be doing. And so our next segment is really around from knowledge to action, trying to identify tools, skills, or pathways that can be used in decolonializing climate scholarship. And so I call on our next speaker, Ms. Trina Malandela, who is at a master's training at the HSRC under the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Division. She is a Master's of Urban Regional Planning candidate at the University of Johannesburg. Her areas of interest and research are in urban regional planning, geographic, information systems, climate change, and sustainable development. Over to you, Ms. Trina. I just want to check if you want me to share or you'll share on your side.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I think I'll share from my side.
Perfect.
Okay, let me try and share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
And it's in presentation mode.
It is.
Okay. Good afternoon once again, colleagues. My name is Trina Malandela. As Dr. Khan has introduced me, I am a master's research trainee for the DCES, and today I will be taking you through a section of my literature for my master's research. So this is something that I've identified as a portion to research further. And just to give you a context of what my study is about, it's a spatial analysis for climate resilience. a GIS-based flood risk adaptation approach for informal settlements in Johannesburg. So this presentation today will be, like Fatima and Dr. Charles have highlighted, it would be taking you guys through the participatory geographic information systems and how that can be used to decolonize climate risk research. So my presentation is structured as follows, where we will be unpacking what PGIS is, why it matters, the potential for it to be seen or used for decolonization research, and the applications of GIS in climate risk context, and how it's seen as an approach for knowledge justice. And I'll also be sharing my final thoughts. PGIS is seen and defined as an approach that blends research methods and tools, those tools being community participation and those tools being GIS, and the research methods being community participation. It engages local people in mapping, risk identification, and planning. It also emphasizes for justice, local voices, and transparency, and support decision making by focusing or emphasizing on lived realities. So PGIS matters because, like Fatima had said, and when she had touched on epistemic research, that PGIS addresses epistemic injustices in climate science. It promotes area-specific and culturally grounded approaches by actually focusing on this, or having a bottom-up approach that shifts power from experts to those that are living on the ground and actually experiencing the risk in real time. So the image on your right actually shows an example of a PGIS workshop where women were actually, so this workshop was focusing on including new voices, where women were seen as active participants. And in this image, you can also see them actually drawing out and showing or identifying areas of vulnerability within their community that they face. And just as a last pointer, as you can see in this map, how PGIS is able to empower communities in the creation of spatial knowledge. I'm sorry about that. So the potential of PGIS to be seen for to be seen for research as a way to decolonize research, it challenges, like I mentioned, it challenges the top-down approaches and the extractive research models by recentering indigenous and experiential knowledge. So the map that you can see here, it actually links to the previous image where the women were actually mapping out. So this was in Isolo in Kenya, where they were mapping out issues or lived experience that they faced within the pastoral communities. So this exercise is actually seen as a way to enhance resource mapping by bringing in these new voices into these planning processes, where the women also added another layer of this data where they identified grazing areas, resources and routes that they used within the community. So it was also seen that the women's input was very vital because it shared certain aspects that were overlooked by your traditional approaches. These inputs were things such as your resources at house level and how these resources are used at house levels, aspects such as water management and your seasonal water sources within the community. So as another potential way in which PGIS can be used, it documents and reveals the spatial injustices, and it builds collaborative approaches to governance and adaptation. So the slide will be taking you through the applications of PGIS in climate risk contexts. So it has a potential to be used for mapping, identifying, and designing. So it's used for mapping flood-prone areas with community members, as seen in your map on your left, where the first map shows community mapping results, and the second map is then an overlay with the community map and the household survey results, where it's showing areas that are prone to flooding and prone to landslides. So this assists in identifying those infrastructural and environmental vulnerabilities that are present within various communities. And it also assists in designing locally grounded adaptation and resilience strategies. PGIS is also seen
Signa,
to, yes,
you have 2 minutes left.
okay.
Not to panic you.
No worries. So the second way in which PGIS has been applied in climate risk context is that it had been used as a way to visualize and integrate local knowledge. So the above map shows, and it's mainly showing an appreciation of a change in shorelines from 1932 to 2018. This was also in collaboration with the communities, where it mainly highlights the potential use of time-lapse series of photography and aerial photography. So for knowledge justice, PGIS supports epistemic and spatial justice by enhancing visualization and participation. It also sees community members as knowledge producers who are involved in the decision-making processes, which also assists in addressing any gaps that may be within the data, especially in these vulnerable communities. It also disrupts the traditional climate change narratives by showcasing or actually focusing more on the impacts of climate change in on the ground for the communities. But I need to also mention that as much as it might sound all good, it is a complex task. And it should be noted that when involving dealing with communities, it is a complex task, as there's certain barriers such as understanding of technicalities and just applying or understanding this technical research at a ground or normal, for a normal layman's term, for someone who's on the ground. So to move forward from the decolonial practice, PGIS avoids tokenism and emphasizes for deep collaboration with the communities. Like I mentioned, it also is used to rethink the expert knowledge, and also to include the local and indigenous voices. And it also fosters for long-term partnerships, co-ownership of the knowledge that has been produced. So as my final thoughts and wrapping up, ICPGI is to be more than a method, but I see it as a political and ethical stance to unpacking and understanding social phenomena within the climate risk research space. And I see it as a way that enables inclusive and responsive climate planning. And I also see it as a critical tool for decolonizing climate risk scholarship, and as it elevates African or even contextual knowledge in shaping climate futures. And that will be the end of my presentation. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Trina. And I forgot to mention that it is next week is actually climate change week, the 8th to the 13th. So I think this is quite fitting in the sense. And as I introduce our final speaker, I'm really going to ask for some patience because I think the work that is being done is quite exciting. We see it come to life, all of these conversations that we are having. And so I'm really going to ask if we can, colleagues who are in the room, to allow us to afford the same time that was initially on the program. And so I am pleased to introduce Ms. Lisa Kanya Matiso, who is an intersectional justice activist from Cape Town, South Africa, dedicating to advancing climate justice and sustainability. Since 2019, she has been deeply engaged in activism and community-driven initiatives, contributing to climate discourse through advocacy, policy engagement, and public outreach. Her experience includes leadership roles in organizations like the African Climate Alliance. As an advocate for Afrocentric climate justice and youth leadership, Lisa Kanya has represented young voices at major climate conferences such as the COP since 2022. Through her work, she continues to inspire and mobilize communities to take meaningful action against climate change and advance sustainable development. So over to you, Ms. Lisa Kanya. I am just putting your presentation up, and then we can start. Just give me a second. Can I just get a sense if everybody can see?
Yes, it's very much
Just
visible on my side.
Perfect. Okay, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I know this has been quite a very intense, engaging session, informative session. That's what I meant to say. Thank you so much for having me in the space. My name is Lisa Kanya Matiso, and I'm from the African Climate Alliance. And as mentioned, I have started this work back in 2019 when I was actually not really sure what I was doing, but throughout, being in the space and engaging in, with different people, networking and engaging with a lot of this knowledge, I then can say I can stand in front of people and actually talk about what climate change, intersectionality, climate justice is like as a whole. And yeah, so how I'm going to start my presentation is I'll just bring it back to climate change, what climate change is. I know it has been covered quite a lot, but it just helps with to bring in about the sense of grounding when you're opening up the space. So next slide, please. Thank you. So climate change refers to long-term shifts in weather patterns, and it is something that can happen naturally. But today, human actions like the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and resource overuse have drastically accelerated this process. And as a result, we are seeing more extreme weather events, deepening resource scarcity, and growing threats to food, water, and health security, especially across vulnerable or marginalized communities. But climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue. And to truly understand its impact, we need to look through the lens of intersectionality. So intersectionality helps us see how overlapping systems of discrimination, this includes racism, sexism, classism, shape people's experiences of climate risks. It shows us that individuals aren't affected in the same way. We are all affected differently. Some face multiple inequalities at once, making them more vulnerable and less supported. So when we're talking about this topic as a whole, we need to ask ourselves, especially when it comes to intersectionality, we need to ask ourselves, who is affected? How are they affected? And why? So that's the power of intersectionality in the climate justice space, or in the with climate justice as a whole. Can we move to slide 2? So now, let's take a look at how, these overlapping inequalities show up in real life. For example, take housing. Low-income communities often live in flood-prone or polluted areas, not by choice, but because of systemic exclusion, spatial injustice in the sense, because you take that in most cases, and from my experience, houses that are in Kailicha, Mitchell's Plain, and you name all those areas, those houses are built on top of aquifers, meaning that there's water that's underground water. And when it rains, that water comes up and it causes a lot of floods. And that happens because of we were put in places where thorough research was not necessarily done. So we unfortunately have to live within these cases, and we have to adapt to them because it's our everyday life. So now, also think about youth. Young people are leading the climate action today, yet they are often excluded from decision-making spaces. They face unemployment, underrepresentation, and limited access to resources. For example, with my experience with attending COP, to be quite honest, I did not necessarily engage in a lot of things. I was just there as a tick box. And we need to change that, because as young people, we know we have skills that can help influence how we want, help influence the future that we want and help support the solutions that we want. However, the agenda is created without us. So even if whatever that we say is valid, because the agenda was created before we even got to those venues or we even sat in those tables, then it means that our words or whatever that we say is not going to be put into there. Gender plays a huge role too. Women, especially in rural areas, carry the burden of water collection, caregiving, and food production, all of which becomes harder during climate shocks. And when we look at the economy, we see how poverty intersects with climate vulnerability. Those with fewer resources have less ability to adapt, relocate, or recover. So this is why our solutions must reflect lived experiences. So when we understand this overlapping inequalities, we can design climate actions that are not just technical, but they're solutions that are fair, inclusive, and rooted in justice. Can you please move to the next slide? Thank you. So I wrote here, to decolonize climate discourse is to center those who live the solution. So this quote is a powerful reminder that decolonizing climate discourse means shifting away from top-down Western-centric narratives, but taking the bottom-up approach. It means centering the voices, knowledge systems, and lived experiences of those who are not just impacted, but who are actively building solutions. So in Africa, climate justice is not just theoretical. It is rooted in community resilience, indigenous knowledge, and youth-led innovations. So to decolonize is to listen deeply, to co-create, and to honor the leadership already happening on the ground. Next slide, please. So when we talk about Afrocentric, meaning Africa-centered climate justice, we are talking about solutions guided by intersectionality and Afrocentric values. Values like communal care, intergenerational wisdom, and ecological stewardship. Our climate responses must reflect the unique socio-environmental realities of Africa's most impacted communities. That means creating safe and inclusive spaces for young people, youth in general, to build climate justice knowledge and leadership. Number 2, amplifying youth voices in policy, media, and decision-making. Number 3, mobilizing African youth in campaigns and actions that push for systemic and global transformation. And number 4, fostering solidarity and collaboration across youth, communities, and civil society. For example, with the work that we do, we have done solidarity gatherings, which focuses on decentralized spaces for reflection, healing, and collective action. Youth-led policy dialogues, meaning the NDCs, where young people shape national climate commitments. And also what's coming up is the Climate Week, which is happening next week, starting from Monday here in Cape Town. And just a little bit of a quick brief on what Climate Week is. So Climate Week is a citywide celebration of grassroots climate justice running from the 8th until the 13th of September. It is youth-led, Afrocentric, and deeply intersectional. Themes include energy justice, water justice, food justice, spatial justice, gender justice, and intergenerational solidarity. And events range from your group cycles until the interactive gatherings across Cape Town. So it connects climate change to South Africa's social justice struggle, especially the legacy of spatial apartheid and resource inequality. For more information, you can go to you can just type climateweek.org.za and then it will take you directly there. But for more information, you can visit our website at africanclimatealliance.org or send an email to either myself or the team account, team@African Climate Alliance or Lisa@African Climate Alliance, but I'll also put it in the chat. Thank you so much for hearing me out, and thank you so much for the insightful workshop that we had today.
Thank you so much. Spot on in terms of time. And I really want to recognize, I think, just the intersectional lens. And I just want to say that our panel today, I think, like, we are getting there slowly, or we are getting there because it was women, it was youth, and we're part of the conversation right now. So I'm just realizing that we are getting there. And I think that I will ask anyone to just make a few, recognizing that we're 1 minute over, just to get any reflections or comments. I'm also going to leave the poll open. There's the poll is still open for people to share a tool or a resource, so you can continue on that. But then I just wanted to check if there's any comments specifically for Trina or for Lisa. Any comments, reflections? I saw people were showing much appreciation to both of the presentations. So I don't know if someone wants to vocalize that.
If I may say something?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Lisa for representing South Africans in the International Cup. I think that often for young people that gets left out, I think she's doing a brilliant job, and I really enjoyed her presentation. So I just wanted to say thank you to her and all the other presenters, but most especially thank you to her because she's on the ground doing a lot of the emotional work and fighting for the rights of people that are marginalized. So thank you so much, Lisa. You are appreciated.
Thank you, Fatima. Colleagues, is there anything else? I'm going to hand over to Dr. Wilfred to just basically give to locate what the webinar is about and the conference, and then we'll close because we are over. I think what we would like to do is also just ask our presenters to share their presentations or the contact details, and we'll circulate it with our delegates, and then they can get in contact with you directly because it won't stop here. That's all I know. Yeah. Over to you, Dr. Wilfred.
Thank you, Dr. Khadija. Thank you so much, colleagues, all the presenters. This was an eye-opener for me, and I hope not only for me, but for also all the other colleagues who were able to join. So I really enjoyed all the presentations, and I have some takeaways which I took note of. The first one for me is that climate knowledge production is inherently political, creating hierarchies that constitute epistemic violence. And the other takeaway which I took was centering marginalized knowledge systems like those in Africa is not just ethical, but it is a critical scientific imperative that is for effective adaptation. And the other takeaway is decolonial methodologies really offer practical scientific rigorous pathways to disrupt epistemic violence and also to actually help, especially moving beyond the critique to provide tangible tools for generating climate solutions that are scientifically sound, socially robust, and also inherently more just because they are born from a plurality of voices. And this is critical, as my colleagues have already alluded to say it paves the way for the conference which we are going to have in Namibia in Windhoek. And we hope quite a lot of other colleagues who are present here will be able to participate in that conference, share information that will build us. And also, I'm happy, colleagues, to say most of the things which we were talking about here. That's why I was asking, what is the way forward from here? We think for us, researchers, we think this is the opportune time to really share this knowledge with upcoming researchers. Already you can see young colleagues who presented. They were presenting quite a lot of very useful information. And also, I'm happy to share with you, I've already put on the chart an article which we wrote, where we are also showing what is it that needs to be done in terms of coming up with new frameworks, new models. And I wish if you can have time just to read that article so that you can also critique and see what's the way forward. Thank you, colleagues. I hand over back to Dr. Khadija.
Okay. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Dane for any reflections and comments. I know you had a burning question earlier.
Thank you so much, Dr. And I'd say to all the presenters, thank you so much for the riveting presentations. I was just reflecting on Dr. Charles and Fatima's presentations particularly. And I'm left with a question, right, and this kind of piggybacks, right, on what Dr. Wilfred keeps emphasizing, where to from here. And I think about this question about also who do we hold accountable? Because I think of journal editors, right? These custodians of policy grants, right, that we apply to these high impact journal editors. Right. So the question is, because it seems like we're tackling within, but we're not pushing up. And so my question is, in that where to from here, who do we then hold responsible for just always reenacting these violences, right, as Fatima so eloquently put it? Because I think that until editor, because like myself as an academic, I'm always questioned by these global North journals, and you sometimes wonder, does the rejection come because you don't write according to their style and they feel it should be written, and on that basis they then exclude your paper? And so even there is that that epistemic violence that Fatima speaks about. And so I do question, who do we also apportion the responsibility to kind of decolonialize, these various eras of colonialism and oppression that we see even in the way that we publish and disseminate our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Dane. I think, I was thinking along the similar lines in terms of the ecosystem. And for me, I wrote down, I know it was on one of Fatima's slides around the right to self-define, right? And it's into what you were saying around who is responsible for decolonializing, because now we're placing it on ourselves to decolonialize the space, right? It's the same as within gender-based violence, where the victim needs to kind of move out of that space and do things, right, instead of changing the structural issues. And so I think for me also, what from my observation is really that when we look at the ecosystem, the academic ecosystem, or the research and the knowledge production the ecosystem, it's still lagging behind, far behind, in terms of people don't want to invest the time into building those relationships on the ground, right? I think Dr. Charles was speaking about that shortcut way where we collaborate, but the decision making still lies with the global north. Right, so we have it as where, as someone was saying, tokenism, in terms of it's just that. So I think for us, to shift the needle, it's really in one of the presentations was speaking of the bottom up, which I really do like. I think that presentation, or the Trina's presentation, speaking about the bottom up approach, but in that itself there was a challenge that was mentioned explicitly around the technicalities, right? And I think just reflecting on that, because that is where the work stops almost, because then we short circuit the system, because we can't spend 5 years on a project, the money is only going to last 2 years or whatever. I'm just thinking pragmatically. So our values, we are guided by certain values and principles, but when it comes to the research work, we are also then guided by the resources and those things. And it still needs some of that work in how are we going to do things innovatively with the money that we kind of don't have. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to end off on a negative point, but I think there are many ways in which I can see how we can start, resisting the status quo at this point. So I don't know, Dr. Wilfred, I'm going to hand over to do a closure, because we can go on forever, and we don't want to do that. It's a Friday afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Khadija. Indeed, we can go on. Like I told you, the first presentation really hooked me, and I forgot about time, because it was hitting exactly on those issues which we always talk about and discuss. And the question which you have raised, Dr. Den, is really spot on. And I've put in what I think are the institutions which we need to hold account. One, I put the international organizations and funders. Why? They are funding this and, promoting only one side of knowledge. And I also blame our national and policy level institutions, especially our governments. You find the policies are embedded in those policies, which have nothing to do with us. It's because when they plan, they are funded by those big institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, name it, all those. Currently, there was a workshop, I saw Kwanele here with us, where I asked the question, how much funding do we get from our national governments in Africa? We were shocked to get that less than 5% is actually sent into development. And then the other thing is research, us researchers as well. If you don't cite Western authorities as you are doing your research, you'll be critiqued. Myself and Dr. Msaruru have got an article which was not accepted based on that we didn't cite a certain scholar in that field. So you can see in research as well, there are all those issues. Communities themselves and civil society, we are not doing enough, actually. So those are some of my thinking in terms of who should we hold accountable. So if you look at those institutions, you find almost all of us are partly to blame. And colleagues, I think without saying much, I would like to say thank you so much. For me, this was an eye-opener because we were able to get a lot of insights from other colleagues who are outside with our community where we are working. And I wish all of you well done in organizing this conference. Thank you so much. I'm sure we can adjourn.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.